Welcome into the Inside Bassmaster Podcast. I'm your host, as always, Ronnie Moore. My co-host, as usual, Kyle Jessie. And Kyle, we have been doing this podcast for basically a year. We started doing it, revamped it, and started doing it again in February of 2022. Now we are February 2023, 1 year into it. We and not to bury the lead, our guest today, our star of the day, is Greg Hackney, and we appreciate you joining us for the February edition of Pattern of the Month. I know we're excited to pick your brain today. It seems like every year, Greg, as we get into the discussion of February fishing, it seems like every year you start off the season so strong. I mean, it's not like your midpoint or your late of the season is bad either. You're always going to have a pretty consistent overall season, but you always start off strong with a top 10 in Florida to start the year, or if we have a back-to-back, the second leg is a top 10, something like that. But in a month, also in a state that can be so tumultuous. Everyone wants to run down to the Sunshine State in January and February, but often I think half of our field is worried when they get to Florida because they don't know what they're going to get.
You know, that is probably one of the drawbacks. It's, you know, we never know how the weather's going to be that early in the year. So I have been watching, I'm big time into the Weather Channel. You know, I've been looking at the 15-day forecast every day. Every day I look to see how far out I can look into Florida that we're going. As of, they've had a really, really mild winter, lots of 80-degree temperatures. And I'm afraid now, just naturally, but I'm afraid that we're going to have winter in February. And there's a chance, because I can't see out yet to the, you know, our actual fishing dates, that we could have a cold front. But I love to start our season in Florida because regardless how cold it is, it's typically always the warmest place in the country. You know, I mean, it wasn't two springs ago when we started at St. John's and fish were spawning that the rest of the country, I mean, they were having blackouts in Texas because it was so cold. And, you know, we escaped that, you know, by being in Florida. So there's a couple reasons I think for me personally that Florida's been good to me in the past. It is, I'm always excited to get the year started. So, you know, I'm excited about just going fishing. And early on in my career as a professional, it was one of the first places that I went out of the state fishing, you know, out of Arkansas or Louisiana. It was one of the first places that, and I had a good finish. My first tournament ever on Okeechobee, I finished in the top 10. And it's just one of those deals. And it's not just Okeechobee, it's just Florida in general. I like that style of fishing. It's power fishing, it's heavy cover, and it's giant bass. And I don't know which one, if it's all the combined ones, but it's just something exciting about being in Florida. I like to go places where you can fish where it looks like a bass. You know, I grew up watching Roland Martin on television, you know, and he was catching 10-pounders on a gold spoon, you know, just so Florida was like one of those greatest places on the planet to go bass fishing. So, and it still is. You know, we were talking about that earlier. There's not a lake in Florida that you can't catch 5 that weigh 20 pounds out of. And there's not a lake I mean, even the bad lakes in Florida, you can catch 20 pounds. The bad lakes in Florida have 10-pounders, you know, so if you love bass fishing, you got to go to Florida. You know what I mean? Sometime during the, you know, Julie and I talk about it. Hopefully one of these days I'll have a house in Florida. And as soon as deer season's over, I will move to Florida for 3 or 4 months. But go ahead.
Go ahead.
Well, but you know what we're going to run into is, let's just say the weather stays like it is now. You know, fish in Okeechobee typically start spawning in December or November, sometime even November. I've heard of that. The fishing is phenomenal there in October and November because it's pre-spawn. That's crazy to think that, but October and November are probably the 2 best months. If you were just going to pick a month to go to Okeechobee, typically that would be the best because they're pre-spawn. But it's been such a mild winter that it's going to be a deal where I think it can, if it stays that warm, it can be one on spawners or it could be one on post spawners. It probably won't be one on pre-spawners, if that makes sense. That's just kind of my feeling. I mean, fish at Okeechobee will spawn till April. March is a big spawner. It just kind of depends on the weather, but I think it's going to set up, if it doesn't turn cold, that a guy can win basically how he wants to, if that makes sense. Like targeting the fish that, you know, you can look for spawners. I've been looking at some tournament weights there. The weights are big. 28 to 32 they've gotten bigger. Because I was a little concerned about the hurricane. I had heard they did have some fish kill. I just know how hurricanes affect our area. They can be detrimental to a fishery. They had a couple big tournaments in the fall. It still took like 50 pounds to win for 2 days, but it seems like the weights have got increasingly bigger as the winter has progressed. So I don't know, giddy up. I've been there when it was cooler. There'll be a lot of vegetation. It's one of those deals. It could be one punch, and like I said, there's a lot of ways that I just can't see that. Regardless of what happens, there's going to be a bad way to fish, if that makes sense. It's all going to be good, whether you're winding something or flipping something or punching mats or sight fishing the other deal is the lake is high, 16. I looked this morning. It's creeped down a little bit. And when I'm talking about a little bit, I'm talking about a couple inches. I mean, like, it's been ever since it came up to like 16 and a half or so right after the hurricane. And then it's like, realistically, the amount of water that's come out, it could have been by evaporation. You know what I mean? It's full of water. So there'll be a lot of vegetation. Guys will be able to get way back, I don't know. I'm excited about it. It's funny. Seminole's one of my favorite places too. Seminole, honestly, is probably one of the most important places in my career.
You told me this, yeah.
Yeah, and so I look forward to going there too. To me, it's like so I grew up fishing Southeast Arkansas. It's like a big version of Cane Creek Lake where I grew up fishing, or it's like some of it looks like Toledo Bend. I mean, it's just a great fishery, hydrilla, another one in big fish fisheries. I will tell you this. I typically get up for places that got big ones. I just like to fish for big ones. And, and it's not that I don't like to fish for all bass. I mean, I catch whatever, but
hey, you've won at the Sabine before, so you do like big ones. You do like big ones.
I was just thinking that.
But I like just bass fishing, but I do like going to our first couple tournaments. I'm excited about our whole year. Honestly, our schedule is really, really good. I mean, our first 6 events will be dominated by largemouth, maybe some spots in a couple in the Alabama area, but and then we're rolling north to the fish factories. We know the last 3 events will be total slugfest. I could see some of our other events in the middle of the season being more grinders. We are going to Sabine River in June. I'll be honest with you, I think that's a much better time to go there than any other time.
That's what we're trying to tell everybody,
Yeah, no doubt. Those types of fisheries set up better in the summertime, because the weights will be as good in the summertime as they would be in the spring. So I like it when we're planning out our season on the spring that we head hunt. And our first, I mean, dang, man, look at our schedule. Okeechobee, Seminole, Knoxville, and then we're heading to the Carolinas to Lake Murray, big fish fishery, and then, of course, back to Santee Cooper, and they'll be totally different. You know what I mean? Because we're going a little later in the spring for those. But, man, it looks good. We'll see, but it looks good. But like I said, I think it means more probably to me I'm always anxious to get the season started, and I'm excited about, knowing that you're going to a place like maybe where a 10-pounder is possible, but not likely, but 8-pounders are very likely at our first 2 events. And, early season, I think it should be good.
Absolutely. And Greg, one thing you mentioned there obviously was the potential to power fish in those events. And I feel like over the last few years, power fishing has kind of taken on a whole new realm. Like, everybody has a kind of a different definition of what power fishing is. And, the month of February, obviously when we're talking about right here, power fishing obviously starts to play a big role in these events. To you, like, define power fishing. Is it chunking and winding something? Is it dabbing your cricket in an area? Like, what is power fishing? Explain that to somebody that might not understand that.
Well, basically, it's using, bigger than average size lures and using big tackle. And it doesn't matter. Like, power fishing can be throwing a 2.5 or a 4.5 square bill. To me, that's power fishing. Big bladed spinner baits, bladed jigs.
Aggressive. Yeah.
Yeah. Aggressive, big line. Not, now with all that being said, I know without a shadow of doubt, and I'll have 2 or 3 of them egg beaters in my boat too, because anytime during the spring, you will fill in the cracks finesse fishing. Like I'm not trying to lose my street creds here, but you can make it as a professional angler without a spinning rod. And I'm not like the guys that carry 8, but I always carry like, so I've got 3 packed. About 6 is about the most my boat will ever have in it. But
and that's on
I
Ontario.
A wacky worm, a drop shot. You have to have that stuff. It'll be a factor to some extent in Florida, whether it's a guy sight fishing for a big one he can't catch, or just blind fishing with a wacky rig ocho. That kind of stuff, you have to have it out. I'll have it on the deck regardless, even if I practice that way, because it'll just get you a fish when you need one. It could be a deal where it just slips off and gets bluebird. There are things that happen that you cannot be. The one thing I'm for sure about, I think this is about my 21st year as a professional, or this will be maybe starting my 21st season. I think you have to be diversified. You cannot be one-dimensional. Those guys don't make it. Well, here's my deal. You can be one-dimensional and have good finishes, but your average will not be good. And I'll be honest with you, it's probably hurt me on some winning sometime. But I need to be consistent, if that makes sense. That's for no one else but me. But I've always have prided myself as being a consistent angler. And it doesn't matter if we go north, south, east, or west. Consistently, my consistency is on time. It always has been.
Well, I specifically mentioned you in conversations, and Jason Christie, and even guys like Gerald Swindle on 2 different ends of the spectrum. You guys are all 3 consistent, very consistent, and not saying Swindle doesn't have that switch. It's just the timing of lining up to get wins. But like, you guys are consistent, but when it gets to a day 3 or a day 4, and you're in the hunt and you've found your groove of comfort, rhythm, there's a switch that flips and you're no longer consistent. I'm going to catch the biggest bag of the tournament today, and I'm going to catch it tomorrow, and you can't beat me. It's one of those, like, I'm a killer now. I was consistent, and now all of a sudden that switch flips, because there's a lot of consistent folks who will end with a great career, and they don't have as many trophies as those guys who have that just, I'm going to go win today, type of thing.
Yeah, but I think you have to be consistent to put yourself in those positions. You have to put yourself in that position to win a lot, to win once, if that makes sense.
For sure.
And then it is kind of that deal that everything has to line up. The stars, the moon, everything has to go perfect. It is hard to.
I think you've had like 4 or 5, maybe more top 10s since you've came back. But haven't gotten a trophy, since you've returned to the Elite Series. But we've seen you in the top 10 at the Tennessee River. We saw you at Gunnersville. We've seen you these places, and it happens. But yeah, I mean, most guys your caliber, if you give them 3 opportunities in the top 10, one of them is a trophy. So it's been a little abnormal if it's been more than that for you. But it's one of those, yeah, you're close.
There's a couple places so I have some top 10s where I couldn't win. You know what I mean? Really, the only one that really sticks out to me the last 2 years where I legitimately had a shot of winning, and I think I zigged when I should have zagged the last morning, was at St. John's. That haunts me, that second there, because that was one that I rushed. I just, I look back at my mistakes. Hindsight is 20/20, but I wish I had I wish I'd had started different the last day. But that's the only one, because I studied myself and everybody, and that's the only one where when I really look back at it, I was around the right fish to win. You know what I mean? Like, you can have good finishes and not win. And I'll be honest with you about this. Now, that's one thing. If I have a decent finish or a good finish or whatever, and I didn't make any mistakes, I don't second guess myself about that, because I've been doing this long enough to know that you can't win them all, But that's the only one. Like, I finished
Caleb
third.
Kufal had the huge lead at Gunnersville, and you were in the top 10. But it's like, yeah, no shot.
Yeah, so I finished third at that Gunnersville event, and I fished really, really clean. You know what I mean? Like, I made good decisions. The last day I ran new water. and actually moved up to third the last day. And like, I wasn't around the fish to win, but that St. John's tournament I was. Last year at Santee Cooper, I had a good tournament. I was never around the fish to win. You know what I mean? I caught almost 29 pounds the first day, but that was it. I replenished the area. It was the best thing I had going. And then I pretty much scrambled the last 2 days of the tournament and just fished around and tried to, but I did catch enough the first couple of days. Then the last 2 days, I was like, I can't win on my primary area. So I abandoned it and just went fishing the third and the second day, looking for something big. It didn't happen, but I felt like the only chance I was going to have of winning was to do that. And, but yeah, so I look at tournaments, and then I've had some tournaments, honestly, when I was around, and I think this happens to everybody. You're really, really close. You might even be around the winning fish and didn't win. So I'll tell you this, the last time we were at the Sabine River, I feel like one bite cost me my chance of winning. It was the first day I lose a 6-pounder. That whole fish changes the whole outcome. Those tough tournaments are like that. A lot of times it's just one fish. Well, that one fish makes the whole week. You know what I mean?
That was on a plug, right? You were on live for that. Like that was right at the boat side of the boat right there.
Never saw, the only thing about it was I never saw how the fish was hooked. I mean, it crushed it when it got it. I don't know what happened, but anyway, and that burns me because the deal was by day 3, a place that didn't turn out on day 2 because of tide would have been right on day 3. And I never got a chance to, I never fished it. You know what I mean? So things happen like that. A lot of times you can be around the right ones and things just don't work out, that type of deal or whatever. But yeah, I studied myself. I go back and look at tournaments. I'm like, man, what could I have done different? Do I need to tweak my practice? You know what I mean? Like, you have that. But yeah, I do want to win again. You know what I mean? Like, I want to win a lot. I want to win the Classic for sure. But I need a win. I haven't had a win in a while, and wins are hard to come by. But again, I'm like, you know what? I don't know that I would trade wins for my consistency, because I'll be honest with you, I don't know how many top 10s I got in bass, but it's got to be pushing 100 or more. I don't know. It's a lot.
While Kyle asks this next one, I'll look that up.
Okay.
And I was gonna say, when you mentioned that about the Sabine the last time around, to your credit, the Sabine event that you won the first time, or 2 times ago, what did you have the first day? You had a real big one to anchor that 19-pound or 16 or whatever it was. So, I mean, that's like a perfect example of.
I had a 514.
Yeah.
And I don't catch that fish that day. It completely changes. It tightened everything up. I think after the first 2 days, I had like a 6 or 7 pound lead and still ended up winning by 4. But yeah, big ones there go a long ways. And that would have been the deal, because if I already looked at that, I would have had almost 15 pounds that day. The first day I ended up with like 8 and change, and I would have culled a 1-pounder with a 6-pounder. Makes a big difference.
Which is like a 10 and a 3 at Santee. Yeah, it's taking a 10 and dropping a 3 back in. So Greg, I looked in it. You have like 200. You just eclipsed 200 career bass events last season, which is an awesome number mark to hit. 60 something top 10s, and almost half of your events have been top 20s. You have 90 something top 20s out of 200 events. So
that's not bad.
Not too shabby. And these aren't 20 boat turbies where you're automatically in the top 20 if you fish. So congratulations on that. And yeah, and I was looking at numbers of winnings and stuff. You're right up there in the top 10 all-time winnings, 2.69 million. So hey, if you win the big one this year, you win a couple of elites, or you could surpass 3 million this year. That would be cool to see on the final day of something.
That good on a lot of levels.
Yes, that Florida home would be already in the works. We'd get that taken care of. But so let's talk about cold fronts, because I was looking at Okeechobee. I mean, we could look at St. John's. You mentioned it. St. John's, you've caught 2 or 3 of your biggest career fish at the St. John's. I think you said you caught 3 10-pounders. 2 of them came in on Derby Day when it mattered the most. At Okeechobee, out of the 4 events that you fished with bass there, you have 3 top 10s. Somehow, when we broke 100 there in 2012, that was your worst one. I don't know how, but you got top 10s in the rest of them.
Yeah, that was self-inflicted.
Self-inflicted. Well, so tell me about cold fronts, because you said I don't want a cold front necessarily, but in Florida, a cold front isn't always a negative. It can, if it's far enough out, or if it's quick enough, or maybe if it's not as harsh, it can maybe bring a new wave, or it can change things to get them ready in a hurry. How do you look at cold fronts if you do see it on the weather?
So the only thing is, what you typically, they're short lived this time of the year. That, if we go to Okeechobee and a cold front hits, chances are it won't last the entire week, if that makes sense. Typically, you'll have 2 days at the most of the colder temperature, and then it'll start climbing back up. But the one thing that you have with cold fronts typically that reach that far south is wind. And that's really what does a lot of damage and will blow an area out. And I have had that in the past there. Like, had a really good area and a front blows through, and just, you'll get that northwest wind that blows 20, 25 across Okeechobee, and it'll turn it upside down. And another thing with the water, as high as it is, a lot of times when it's real high, it dirties a lot of water, because it doesn't have that protection on the outside. When it's down and you're fishing on the inside of stuff, that you got that big grass to kind of block that. But when it's high like that, that dirty water will push way back and hurt. I've caught them good there during cold fronts. It just kind of depends. The other thing about a cold front floor, it doesn't have to be. We get some 40-degree nights, and which here wouldn't do anything to our fish right now, but there can be detrimental. But probably the biggest thing that has hurt me there in the past in a cold front is the wind. And it's not just me, it hurts a lot of people. It's protected. You just got to look for protected stuff. And then that kind of wads everybody up. And, another thing that can happen when it's high like that, it can condense the fishing area there. You would think that it would expand it, but what it does just knocks out so much. Now, I don't know how the lake is, you know what I mean? But from past experience, when it was high, it dirties a lot of it. You know what I mean? And those fish in Florida don't like dirty water. And, it, like you said, it can have a real positive effect in that it can bunch those fish up, that those females will hang up on stuff. That's the deal in Florida. You know what I mean? Is females. You don't, in that part of Florida, you don't catch a lot of big males. A big male there's a 3-pounder, So you need to have every day, regardless of what it takes to win, you got to have 2 or 3 of those 5 to 8 pound bites every day there to do any good.
We saw the positivity of a cold front in 2019 at the St. John's, where it was the perfect storm. It was like a Monday, Tuesday, cold front. We had the Wednesday media day, off day, and it was getting warmer. Everybody took their jackets off at lunchtime on Wednesday, and then Thursday through Sunday, it just developed, and 30-pound bags popped up at the St. John's. And then Clun has that giant bag on the final day, 2 10-pounders to win. And it almost breaks 100. So we've seen it where if it is cold and maybe it's a few days out or during practice, you only get a couple bites and you seem pessimistic, but it's going to get better during the tournament. I always liked it to get better. I don't want it to be like as best as it's going to be on day one and it go down from there. I like seeing it get better, because then it opens up the lake. I feel you guys get a bite here when it was tough. Now you've got 5 bites here when it's not. It opens the lake up where I can run around and know that fish are biting. And so there's a new area I didn't even try, that if I get a bite, I know there's active fish going to be around, something like that.
If you look back on a lot of Florida tournaments, like back in history, a bunch of them were won the first day.
Yeah. Catch you a big bag and ride it. Yeah.
Shaw Grisby was probably one of the best in the world about catching 30 pounds the first day and then bagging it up to 6 to 8 every day and winning, because the deal is like on a sight fish deal, like during the cold front, they catch them all off the first day, or the one event that, they all left because of a cold front. He slips back into a set of canals when we were at Harris Chain and wins the tournament after everybody left because the fish were gone, and they just show back up when it warms up.
Last hour of the day or whatever. Yeah.
Hour of the day. But, I think when Ish won in the tournament that was so bad for me, it's so funny because I'm not going to talk about it. You don't cry over spilt milk, but it was self-inflicted for myself. But it stayed warm that whole event, but it was in March. In March, it's typically a warmer month there, and overall fishing in March actually is probably better than February. February is just kind of that. It's all going to depend on weather, But, here's the deal. The lake's good enough. We know even if a major cold front does hit, and it's still going to take 20 a day. you could catch 20 a day there when it's bad, when fishing's not good, because it throws in that 8-pound factor. Oh, I caught 4 decent ones in an 8 or 9 pounder, and I got 20 pounds. I think the tournament that Timmy won there, that's how, the first day I didn't have a good practice in that deal. And I ran around. I went on one bite, actually. I went to a place and caught a limit, and I had caught one better one out of an area. Water was a little dirty. And I went in there and caught 2 7s, the first day, and just kind of got my week started. But that is the good thing about Florida, that you can fish for big ones, and big ones are what it's going to take. And, a few of them big bites every day will be the deal. I don't know. I just don't know what to expect. I'm excited about it. Because like I said, we're going to power fish.
Well, speaking of power fish, go ahead. Your last thought there. I want to hear your last thought there.
Well, the deal is, regardless, I don't really. If it's warm, maybe I'm frogging, and if it's cold, I'm flipping mats. It doesn't really matter what the weather is.
Heaven or Heaven 2.0, yeah.
It really. There's nothing. There's no way that I would have to fish. I love the sight fish, so there's no way that I would have to fish there that I would dislike, if that makes sense. It's all good, man. It's Florida,
I remember wearing a jacket at Gros Savant, and you just in your memory bank. I remember it was cold at Gros Savant one time and had a blast. I'm going to be positive, and everyone else is like, "Ugh, this is terrible."
Yeah, like I said, it's like anytime you get around big ones, it's just exciting.
So, the one thing I wanted to bring up, so like this time of year, Florida, or, regardless if you're talking Florida, you're talking anywhere in the Southeast, Greg Hackney is synonymous with jig fishing. That's just true. I think you lead the industry in signature series jigs. I think that's probably a stat that we can look up later, but I'm pretty sure that's fact. And as long as your name's on it, somebody like me is going to buy it. So when you think about, February timeframe, it seems like it's a great opportunity to jig fish because the opportunity to power fish is there. So give me just a kind of a rundown of, your top 3 jigs maybe that you're going to use this time of year, and then this, situations in each that, is going to present itself.
So, swimming a jig is so good in Florida, and Hack Attack heavy cover swim jig is with a rage crawl is tailor made for Okeechobee. And I know this without a doubt. Regardless, it will play a factor for me either practicing or during the tournament. I don't know which it will, because that tournament that I was talking about that Timmy won, I found all the fish I caught in that tournament swimming a jig. I caught them all flipping a jig. I ended up catching them on a 3/4 ounce. Just went back through those areas where I caught them swimming a jig and slowed down with a 3/4 ounce Hack Attack flipping jig. So those 2 jigs, without a doubt, will play. I think the deal with the jig is, again, the hookup ratio is so good on it. That's one of the reasons I like it. I like the bite on it. I like the way fish bite a jig. In Florida, you got fish that are big enough to bite a jig. And again, depending on a jig in Florida has been really good for me, either post-spawn bass or pre-spawn bass. Now, if it's a spawning deal, it'll be more of I'll be planking a shimmy stick, an ocho, or a rage bug, or a rodent, because I typically, once fish are completely locked into spawning, I switch to plastics. But if I can find them any other way, and that's the other deal that could be a factor there. There can be big groups. The one thing that does happen there, pre-spawn females and post-spawn females, they're bunch up. And those are the events where you see guys catch giant bags when it does take 100 pounds. That's what you have to find. Here's the other cool thing about, and I did, and I finished second there in the Bassmaster long time ago. And the deal with that was I found a place where they were coming and going. It was it's one of the best places I've ever found, if that makes sense. I shared it with the winner. I straightened some books.
I think it was Chris Lane or Bobby Lane, one of the Lane brothers. 04, you got second at that Open. I think it was.
No, it was Timmy. Timmy won.
Oh, Timmy won. Oh, okay.
Timmy sharing the same place, and I straightened the hook on 2 8+ pounders the first day, and he caught 32 pounds, and I only caught 23 or something. And then the next day I caught almost 29, and I caught up with him in the last day. I caught 15, and I think he caught 6. But the deal was he rode that big bag to the end, and he ended up beating me by 4 ounces. And he was leading by, one time I think he had a 14-pound lead over me. and I came back and got within 4 ounces. And again, had I picked that jig up, the deal was I lost I don't know, I figured somewhere from 25 to 28 pounds the first day before I caught one. No, it was the second day. The first day I ended up, and I picked the jig up. I was like, I don't know. And I picked the jig up and caught 29 pounds. And I was like, man, wish I'd have picked that up a little sooner. But what was so cool about that school of fish, they were literally in a 100-yard stretch that was 50 yards wide. It was one of those places I caught both pre-spawn and post-spawn fish. They were staging there. They come off the lake, and they were, a lot of those fish live out there on the edge of the rim of the lake, and they were pushing in to spawn, and that was the stopping point. You know what I mean? And we had really nice warm weather in that event, and they were in heavy cover, but it wasn't super heavy, if that makes sense. But it's more about the bottom than it is there's so much vegetation. That's the other cool thing about there. Once you learn the vegetation, it'll kind of show you that's the kind of vegetation they spawn in, because the bottom's hard. This is the kind of stuff when they're in this stuff, they float in it. You know what I mean? They won't be on the bottom when it's soft. If you get in one of those soft areas, it's not that they don't live in that stuff, but they typically always suspend, on the soft, around the soft bottom stuff. They won't be on the bottom.
Yeah, that's the place that they're going to leave when the wind blows, ASAP. Right. They're going to be gone.
It had some heavy cover, but it had a hard bottom. And what's weird about that deal is I don't know that I ever caught a male. I remember in practice there, fishing was so good, I was getting 60 bites a day practicing for that. But it was hard to catch big ones. And I caught a random 5-pounder here or there. And I was catching lots of 3-pounders. And when I found that deal, I'll be honest with you, I don't think Timmy found it to the tournament, because he didn't start there, and I did. And there's no way you could not. That makes sense. But I saw him coming, fishing down the line. Fish his way up there. But anyway, I caught 2 fat 3-pound females, blown up fat. And I was like, man, I haven't seen that. You know what I mean? I was getting lots of bites. I was catching some 3-pound, but these were little mouth, blown up, full of egg 3-pounders. And I was like, and I caught 2 of them back to back. And I was like, man, that's different. I'm going to catch one more. And it was a 9. And that was it. I never made another cast. And it's still to this day one of the, I've been fortunate enough and maybe just finding giant schools of fish. I found one at Pickwick a couple years ago. I found one at Falcon in another tournament. These single spots that are magical. I found a handful of them in my lifetime, and that was one of them. And realistically, if only one of us had been there,
man,
all-time record for because the deal was we shared. I didn't fish where he fished, and he didn't fish where I fished. You know what I mean? It was
you could have wandered off if it was just one person. Yeah,
stretch and never really got to during the tournament. He fished more on the inside of it, and I fished more on the outside of it. But like I said, I had plenty. It's one of those deals. I had plenty of opportunities to win that event going away, and I was still experimenting. The first day, I'd punch with pitch with plastic or whatever, and too much rod for the hook I was using. I was straightening them out. Of course, then now, Gamakatsu's making the hack attack hook.
Yeah, we were going to get to that. Yeah.
So I catch 100 pounds in 3 days in that event with that hook. So my equipment's gotten better, over time too, in that situation. But yeah, I guess a lot of history there for me at Okeechobee. I'll never forget, I got an old paper map of Okeechobee. I must have went there maybe 99 or 2000 was my first time ever there. I can't remember. Julie and I were just married. I remember we had a New Year's party at our house, and everybody was still asleep the next morning. I rolled Okeechobee, what I mean, practice. And it was just, I was just giddy to be there because there was so much history, going there or whatever. And still to this day, I always look forward to going to Florida for our first term. And it doesn't matter. I love St. John's, Harris Chain, Kissimmee, Toho. All those places are fabled, fisheries that have lore around them. You know what I mean?
Sure.
Where fish have names. So you probably don't remember this, but they used to run there was a story about a bass in Bassmaster.
Okay.
Molly. I think it was Molly. Can't remember. There was a whole series. Every month's issue would be another story about how she escaped bass fishermen. And
Oh yeah. Yeah.
yeah, it was the coolest thing. Of course, I was a kid reading that, and you think about Florida, like fish have
Like,
names.
I would have caught him. He ain't no way
Yeah.
he's getting away from me. Like
Yeah.
Molly, she ain't nothing. Uh, so Greg, Kyle loves talking about baits. I love talking about baits. This is a question that I love posing to you. I could ask you this 10 times and you'd say something different a little bit and it would just spark something. But you love the rage bug and you love the rodent, and I believe you love the rodent even more. What makes you in Florida or just in general in February decide between the two? Because yeah, we could do water temperature, but me flipping bushes in Arkansas in February, I'm gonna want as slow as fall as I possibly could if I'm flipping them. But Florida, it's warmer and you could speed it up. But what's the profile pros and cons between the two when you're picking? Like, you got both of them rigged up? What makes you pick up one versus the other?
I'll be honest with you, I catch big ones on both a rage bug and a rodent. But when I'm around big ones, I think big ones tend to bite the rodent better than anything. Like it just kind of depends on the situation. I can't explain this. There's some type of science behind it, but there's something about that body style that appeals to a fish. A rodent doesn't have any action. It basically doesn't do anything, but it's undoubtedly really eye appealing. There's something about the way it looks that it's like fish are predisposed to bite it. So when I get around big ones, cleaner water, typically when I'm flipping plastic and maybe it's a little deeper, I like the rodent better. When they're up there in a foot of water spawning, 2 foot or less, and it's warm, I like that rage bug because it hangs the hang time, if that makes sense. If I'm needing that fish to see that bait before it hits the bottom, that rage bug hangs. It draws so much water. The appendages pull so much water on it. It's such a natural action. I like it on the lightweight when those fish are up there spawning shallow. And there's a period that they go through. If they're locked on the bottom and not really overly aggressive, by far the rodent is the best bed and bait. But if they're guarding a big area, you waking around, boiling, chasing bluegill, rage bug's a better deal because it hangs and they can see it. And then the other thing it allows me to do a couple different things is I can pitch it into something fishing on the bottom and then reel it out slow. And here's the other deal. If I'm pitching a rodent and I reel it out and one chases it, I need to be throwing a rage bug.
And vice versa, or no?
They want that swimming action.
Okay.
Because what that's telling you is, like, I even went through a period with that mentally till I figured this out. I would say, I'm not leaving my bait in one place long enough. And then I reeled it out and the fish chased it. That's not the deal. So I went through a period of life. I thought that the deal is that fish is telling me how he wants that bait moving. When he chases it in, that's the way he wants it.
Yeah. He doesn't want it going this. He wants it going that. Yeah.
Yeah. So then I go to that rage bug because then when I pitch it in there, it's swimming to the bottom. When I pick it up, it's swimming out. And I do catch a lot of fish on it, just pitching it and winding it. Because a lot of times I find what they do, they'll follow it to the bottom. And then when you reel it out, that's when they get it. So I pitch it over and let it go to the bottom. And then I'll just swim it out slow. They want it moving. They'll tell you that. That's the good thing about them. They can't speak. But in their actions, they'll show you what they... So that's kind of the deal. As long as they're not showing themselves, I'll be more on that bottom presentation. But the first time I had one run it, now, and we're talking about fish that are spawning in that mode that you can't see visually with your eyes. You know what I mean? But they'll show stuff. And you'll have a lot of that in Florida because the water's black and dark, and it kind of depends on how the area you're in, if you can see them or not. So
do you follow it up? Is it good to have a wacky rig to follow it up there, or pitch them what they wanted the first time?
When you pull him away, like when you reel it out and you pull him away, we just mark him and come back later and fish for him. And because he's there, he showed himself. So about where he came from. And then you just sometimes you have to slow down. Sometimes you'll catch them the first time, cast back in. Let them forget about you. You go off long enough that they forgot about, what went on. And then you come back and blind fish. But yeah, you always have that wacky. You cannot fish in the spring without a wacky worm. It is impossible. I know that the hard way. You know what I mean? And the deal is, you always have fish that in an area. If you have a big area that you're fishing in, you can only catch so many of them with the same technique, if that makes sense. You'll never, possible to catch them all. You know what I mean? So if you're fishing in an area and it's gotten to where you can't get bit, but you know it's a good area, it's time to change. You know what I mean? I might give myself 15 minutes. If it's a great area, I'm like, I'll go 15 minutes without a bite. Something like, I need to make a change. You know, it's time to. And it's funny. That's another deal that I'll tell you another thing that's going to happen. We're not fishing on the full moon. I'm glad of that. And I'll tell you the reason. The moon is going to fall right the week before. That time of the year, what happens on a full moon, it happens a lot all year actually on the full moon, is fish are on a timing deal. First thing in the morning, then everything goes dead until about 11 o'clock, and then from 11 till 2. You know, so we're going to fish on a decreasing moon in that event. That'll help. That just makes fishing better.
Yeah.
You may not have a big surge anytime during the day, but you can catch them all day. You know what I mean? It just makes them easier to catch. So we got a lot of things going in our advantage for that first tournament to be really, really good. Because like I'm saying, the lake looks like it's fishing good going by these tournament weights it's taken. It's big and full of water, you know, so, I mean, there's only 100 of us, so, but it's Florida, so there'll be places where there are 50 boats, you know, wadded up together. I remember this, somebody told me, like, this, in Florida, they fish a 7-boat pattern. If you get in an area and you see 7 boats, it's a good area. But the cool thing about,
and none of y'all are gonna win.
Yeah, but there'll be a lot of checks drawn that way, you know. But most of the time when a tournament's won at Okeechobee, it's not 10 guys fishing in a group. You know what I mean? There's one guy that's got off to the side and doing something his own, you know, and he may be in the distance because you can see so far there. He may actually be able to see that wad of boats, but he's got something special, you know, in one off.
Buddy Gross at the Harris chain. He was
Right.
right there, but he wasn't in there. He wasn't a part of the Banana Cove guy, but he was near. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And so he's found something by himself. And, you know, here's the other deal. You don't have to be on the most fish in the lake when you're by yourself, because you can micromanage them, you know. So you can do something that is kind of off the beaten path a little bit, you know, because you only need 20 bass. I mean, you think about that. I mean, that's a lot of bass, but you only need 20 bass to win, you know, so you don't have to catch 100, you know, so you can get off by yourself and do something a little different. So I don't know. We'll see. It's going to be good.
So one thing I wanted to switch gears on a little bit more, and I've got one more question after this, Ronnie, that I've been looking forward to asking as well. But, you know, pre-spawn February timeframe, not necessarily Florida so much. I mean, unless you're talking about maybe a trap or things of that nature. But pre-spawn cranking is just, you know, pretty much throughout all the Southeast, you know, pretty much anywhere where the water's not frozen. You know, cranking is going to be a deal. And one of my favorite one-liners, you've had a lot over the course of your career, but was at Lake Dardanelle in 2014, I believe it was. Said, I'm a pretty fair cranker as well. People overlook that part of your game. So when you're talking about, go ahead.
Well, that's just one of those deals. I grew up crankbait fishing a lot, you know, so I have a lot of confidence in. And I really, you know, kind of because of our schedules,
yeah.
Honestly, I feel like I'm a better hot water cranker than I am cold water cranker. I think I've learned the cold water cranking since I've been fishing professionally, because we've had a lot of tournaments, you know, a lot of pre-spawn cranking deals. And I just have a lot of confidence when the water's cold. I'll be honest with you, when it really, really gets cold, I feel like I can catch them better on a crankbait than I can a jig. You know, just because you can show that fish that bait a lot, you can cover a lot of water, and they bite a moving bait when the water's cold. Sometimes I have trouble catching them on something slow when the water's really, really cold, but you can get them to react to a crankbait. So, but I do love shallow cranking. I'd have to rank a square bill up there for me, like jig fishing. Like I really like to do that. I don't do a lot of that kind of fishing anymore. We just don't fish a lot of hot water, you know, shallow river system type deals like where I grew up at. I cranked a lot growing up. But I like it, you know, and I always look for it because I always feel like that's the way I can do well because I have a lot of confidence in, you know, in that. Probably, you know, as far as cranking goes, Okeechobee, unless it's a lipless crankbait or thunder cricket, there won't be a lot of crank in there for me.
Sure.
He'll be going around the rim ditch. They're just gonna do the whole rim ditch.
Yeah, that's
I love rock.
there actually once upon a time, but the water was low. I don't know how the fishing is in a rim ditch when it's high.
Greg, one thing that we talk about in Florida is the cover, grass, water clarity, hard bottom. That's what we talk about. But how much does bait come into play for you? Are you visually seeing bluegill in areas and you're gonna try to find, you know, you're gonna figure out that area, or you're gonna stay in there because you see that bait, or are you looking for the needlefish at the St. John? Like, are you bait oriented, or are you just focused strictly on structure? Because I feel like we're always looking for the same types of structure, but there's some dead mats that don't have any life around them, and then there's going to be a mat where there's a herd of bluegill, and there's going to be 20 bass there instead of, you know, 100 yards down.
So I'll be really honest with you about that. Bait, depending on what stage they're in, is how much of a factor it has. Okay. The last few times we've been to Florida, I wouldn't say bait has played at all, if that makes sense. That has nothing to do. Those fish are thinking about some part of the spawn, so that really is not a factor.
Okay.
If we're going later, March, bluegill would be a huge factor. There also could be a shad spawn. That's about when there's shad spawn there. I've been there in March. That goes on. Those post-spawn fish are bluegill eaters at Okeechobee. So it just kind of depends on if the fish, you know, and like I said, I don't rule anything out, if that makes sense. I have no preconceived notion when I get there. My boat is totally loaded with, like I said, I can frog, a thunder cricket, red-eye shad, whatever it takes. I'm rigged that way. So I don't have any preconceived notion, but only in warmer months in Florida has bait been a factor for me. And I'll tell you another thing. When it's cooler, you don't see a lot of bait anyway, if that makes sense.
And that's I wonder if it's congregated or if it just disappears and it's those highways, like, you know.
Those fish are into that spawn mode. Bait means nothing. When you see a fish chase during that mode, he's just running off a bluegill. Now, I might use a bluegill imitator because he's guarding the bed from them or whatever, but they're not eating them. That big deal about the needlefish, you know, on that prop bait at the St. John's, the big deal with that is those fish are out there in the, you know, back, especially when there was all the eelgrass, those fish are out there spawning in those eelgrass beds. They were chasing that needlefish. That needlefish is a predator. You know, a needlefish is not a bait fish. It's a predator. They get big offshore. You know, they're a saltwater fish that, you know, that inhabits both, you know, fresh and salt water, but they're a predator. I think the big thing with that needlefish around that, you know, they're running that needlefish off to fry eater. I mean, that needlefish is up there eating. You know what I mean? Like, he'll eat the bass fry, he's eating whatever. They're basically a form of a saltwater garfish. You know what I mean? I don't know what relationship, but they look the same, needle mouth full of needle teeth or whatever. But yeah, so I don't know that unless we went later when I knew for sure the fish I was going to fish for were post spawn. I don't necessarily, you know, or the shad were spawning, or because I've been back in on a lot of different lakes in Florida. And you'll be back in those clear holes where those fish are spawning. There are big schools of wild shiners swimming around, and those fish are paying it like they don't even exist. You know, you can be sight fishing for one, and here comes a big school of shiners, and if they don't get too close, you know, those fish don't even, you know. So yeah, I don't know about that first tournament. Like, it'll be big in bait selection. You know what I mean? Like how I choose my bait selection,
profile or colors or style.
Yeah, but I don't necessarily know that, you know, those fish are not setting up that time of the year on a patch of reeds or a certain mat. They're sitting there waiting. They didn't come there to eat. Does that make sense?
Yep.
I mean, we're catching them because they're an opportunist and you drop a bait on them and they bite, but I don't necessarily know that, these fish are right here because now that will happen, you know, later on for sure. You'll hear them bluegill sucking around. That'll all be a big deal. And there are certain places in Florida where those bluegill spawn. and those bass will be, but that all happens, you know, a little later than we're going to be there, you know.
And that's why I wonder, with it being mild, if it doesn't get cold, no official cold front, it stays like it has been, you know, highs in the 80s at times. That's why I wondered if those pre-spawn or post-spawn intersection, that it might affect the guys a little off the bank and not on the something like that maybe.
I'll be honest with you about this. I don't know, like watching the weather for the last couple of months there, I don't know if I've ever been there this early in the year when there's been that much warm weather.
Yeah.
That makes, like, this is I'm not Al Gore, but it's warm. You know what I mean? I mean, it is like our winters here, I'll be honest with you, they suck because I don't want it to be warm.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, I'm one of those people who also believes, like, if we have a lot of cold weather, get ready that spring. The fishing is so much better to me personally when we've had a really, really cold winter cold enough it shuts them down. You know what I mean?
Actual season, yeah.
Yeah, an actual season where we have winter time, you know, and then it warms up in the spring. It seems like they, you know, if it's warm, and then just kind of goes on into the spring like that. You know what I mean? Like it seems like everything's scattered.
Yeah. No definitive wave. Yeah.
Yeah. So there's a little bit of unknown about this tournament just because, and another thing, I've not spent a lot of time on Okeechobee in February. I fished there a lot in January and a lot in March, you know, or maybe not a lot, but that's when I've spent, like, the February deal's kind of a little bit new to me.
Well, and 90% of the field's never been to Okeechobee since the last time we were there in 2017. Like, you know, and anyways, year to year, Okeechobee is different just with how grass changes, the spraying, the growth, the weather, the hurricanes. So I see a lot of guys going down to pre-practice there because it's different. But I know you have a traveling mate, Kobe Krieger, who probably will, you know, give you a little synopsis of the weather and what's been going. Yeah.
Guy who is an elite guy that I can share, that can give me a little bone if he
exactly. That doesn't mind losing to you later, you know, possibly.
Right.
Kyle, you got anything for Greg before we let him go? He's been more than gracious time wise.
One more quick question. So this is more just like a general question, but it seems like no matter, you know, what pattern of the month we shoot, it almost always gets brought up is forward facing sonar. So, you know, in your case, the best I remember, you're still running active targets. Is that right?
That is correct.
So, you know, when it first came out, it was so obvious, you know, that the times and places that it was super effective, you know, on the suspended fish out deep, you know, the typical places you would think of. But it seems like over the last few years, especially on the Elite Series, there's been a lot of, you know, advantage to using it up shallow, even power fishing. You know, can you speak to that and you know, maybe what you've found of using it in places that originally, you know, a lot of guys weren't using it?
So looking at our schedule, if we go there and it's cold, I could see it playing a factor at Okeechobee and for sure at Seminole if it's cold. You know what I mean? Depending on the stage. You know, there's a point when they just go so extremely shallow and there's so much cover, but fishing isolated cover, and Seminole sets up for that. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And, you know, that whole Spring Creek Channel deal, you know, those fish live out there. And there's going to be some pre-spawn fish there regardless of how, you know what I mean? Like,
it can't get warm enough. Yeah.
Yeah. So they've had, like, it's cold right there. It's cold at Seminole now because it's cold at my house now. We have almost the exact same. Actually, it's a little farther north than my house, so it's a little colder there than it is here. So I could definitely see it being a factor. And those are not deep. Now, we're not talking about deep. We're just talking about lakes that it could be a factor on.
Those fish that get off the tree and they're in the channel 20 feet away, just sitting there, they're catchable.
You know, at Okeechobee, they're you know, they still got all that hurricane water. They're still getting rid of that. They've had a bunch of rain. It's probably current in that river. There'll be fish set up in there. You know what I mean? There are places, if you want it to look for it, you know, it's one of those deals that it's going to be a factor to some extent every tournament. It just depends on how much a guy wants to give to it. Does that make sense?
Sure.
You know, and so if you look at our, you know, I mean, dang, them herring chasers at Lake Murray on a point, you can scan and look for those wolf packs with it. I'm like, it doesn't matter. You know, those fish are not going to be very deep, but it looks like we should be hitting that herring spawn there about right on the head, depending on the spring, that late April, you know. I mean, what's the best way to pull up on a clay point? Just scan around. Oh, there's 10 of them big jokers sitting right there. You know, that's where I'm going to throw my caffeine shad.
And they're
you know
not
what?
spotted bass either most of the time. Yeah.
Yeah, that thing is going to be a factor if a guy wants to use it at every tournament from here on out till either the fish catch up on to. Now, I do know that there are certain places that the fish are starting to make adjustments to it.
Yeah.
But I don't see those shallow fish. I don't really see them making adjustment to it. You know, now those swimming around out there in the abyss, you know.
Yeah, boats chasing them that weren't chasing them before, yeah.
All those big ones that are getting caught will not be caught again. That I do know. You know what I mean? Like
sure.
Once they're handling all these giant fish in Texas and all they're catching out there on that thing, when they release her, I promise you, that's it. The next they won't catch her the same, or they definitely won't catch her on the same bait again. So that deal, I feel like will go quicker. They're going to have to start adjusting their tackle. You know what
cyclical,
I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. The first time you throw a rattling jerk bait out there, jerk it down on a 10-pounder, you know, they're fixing to roll. That's going to happen. You know, that's the same thing. When you put pressure on any animal over time, that's what makes them hard to catch. That's the reason we do this. So, yeah, it seems like right now that's the catch-all. But eventually, you know, because you're dealing with a mature animal too, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
We're targeting 2-pounders. They're targeting 10-pounders. That fish has already proved that she's smart enough to get that big for a reason. You know what I mean? Like she makes adjustments better, whatever, you know, so those fish will catch on to it. But like, I mean, that technology is endless. You know what I mean? Like it's going to evolve. And I'll be honest with you. I'm going to fight it to some extent because damn, I'm good at swimming a jig. You know what I mean? I'm like, it's harder for me to do it. And it doesn't have anything to do with it. I'm against it or whatever. It's harder for me. I'm like, man, I'm going to give up all this stuff I'm good at. You see? So for me, I fight that demon in that. But now when we go to St. Clair, I'm all in. Any problem. So here's the deal. I've always been that way. When I need to make that adjustment, I don't have any problem doing it. But now if we're going to come to a deal like at Lake Lake, I'm going to swim a hack attack jig in that bank grass, or I'm going to be out there scanning on points, throwing a jerk bait. You see what I mean? Now, in that situation, I'm probably going to have to fall back on tried and true, you know, or I'm going to be
the fans would vote the same way as well.
Yeah, because here's the deal. I still think I can beat that guy that's
100%.
doing it because I only got to catch 5.
Yeah, he's got to weed through some more, maybe possibly with his style. But that's one thing that's also great. The first 6, we could have first place active target, second place just fishing, or flip-flop. Like in the first 6, you can ignore it or you can utilize it and do just fine in AOI. Like you'll be back-to-back with somebody that has been glued to it and you haven't, you know, or whatever.
I'll be honest with you. I kind of like that. That's the way our schedule is going to be. Now, I will tell you, once we get to July, you better be active targeting the last 3 events. The only place, like for sure, the Thousand Islands, for sure, St. Clair. I mean, man, the smallmouth had gotten so big at Champlain. I don't know that a guy can compete fish. If we went earlier in the year, when because the smallmouth gets so skinny, you know, you would have you could catch largemouth stay heavier after the spawn, but the smallmouth, I don't know. I want to think. I thought a couple years ago in the one that Aaron won that I caught a smallmouth that spit up some gobies. I want to think it's happening to some extent at Champlain. So that
helps it a lot for smallmouth takeover. Yeah.
Getting bigger. And again, they're getting bigger, but our electronics are getting better. So did they get bigger or did our guys just get better? Fishermen in general are just getting better. Well, I mean, our equipment is so good now that, you know, I'll just be honest with you. The average age of a great fisherman in the elites is so much younger than what it used to be. Like there was only a couple when I was coming up. Does that make sense? Most all the guys were, of course, all my heroes were the top guys in the deal when I started. But now it's such a blend because our equipment has made the knowledge, the videos. There's so much. You got to understand when I was a rookie, my rookie season, I was still reading Bassmaster. You know what I mean? That's the only thing I had to help me. You know, to learn. I was still reading it cover to cover. I still do. I just enjoy it. I love Bass Times, but that's all I had. Well, now if I want to see somebody punching at Okeechobee, I can just YouTube up a video. You know what I mean? I can go back and watch every bass, and I do it for enjoyment. Sometimes I do it to learn, but I go back and watch all old Bassmasters. You know, other tournaments, whatever. I want to learn how to tie an FG knot. There's 25 videos out there of people tying an FG knot.
Some
you
of
know
them
what
right,
I mean?
some of them wrong. Yeah.
That's the only way people like Ronnie and I even know how to tie an FG knot is watching a video.
But here's the deal. Everybody has that opportunity.
Yeah.
So it is getting harder. I think,
Adapt
honestly,
or die. Yeah.
I think our sport is getting harder because of that, because, man, used to you had to beat this group. Well, this group is getting bigger and bigger. I think this will, I know, Clun says, well, I can compete forever, whatever. I understand it to some extent. I do believe used to 35 to 45 was, when our guys, the best of our was the max. I see that getting, now it's 30 to 40. Maybe it goes to 25 to 35 and then down from 20, because the guy that's 20, he won't have as much on the water knowledge. He can't catch up
or instincts of just knowing how fish act and behave. Yeah.
Technology is so good. He didn't have, so it's gotten to this point. So there, our guys that have fished a long time, whatever, I use Jason Christie as one of the best at knowing what bait to pick up because the weather changed, weather, wind, looking at the watercolor. But as long as a guy can just look on the screen and see the fish, why does any of that matter? You see? And that's the equalizer. And
but when the going gets easy, everyone can catch them and you can do it how you want. When the going gets tough and that doesn't work, what are you going to fall back on? And you guys have stuff to fall back on. So that's why we see some of these. Yeah, it's still in your favor.
To a young guy coming up, I'm like, you need to spend some days on the water and turn it off. Turn off everything. So I'll give you a case in point. I didn't have my boat here the other day. It was before I went and picked it up or whatever. So I went fishing in the John boat at the house. I go to a place not far from here, and I caught him cranking a drop. And this boat I was fishing in has no depth finder on the. I shelled them. But what I'm saying is, like, I never even, a couple times I'd look down and it wasn't there. You know what I mean? But I knew how the bottom laid or whatever. And the boat has a Lowrance unit on a small one on the back. But the deal is, you can catch fish without that. All that stuff is a tool to make you better. But the advice I'm giving is it'd be good for a guy if he's going to do this for 20 years, 25 years. He wants to be, he's got his goals set high. You need to learn how to do everything. If you look at the guys like Brandon Polnick is probably one of the younger, best fishermen out there. He can catch them doing anything. He's so good with his electronics, but he can catch them doing anything. And if you're going to get through all of it, you got to be able to do everything. Because, Angler of the Year is one bad tournament and you're out.
Oh, yeah.
So a guy who has goals of doing that, you know what I mean? And I would think anybody who makes it to the elites has goals of doing that. Or if they don't need to be there. You know what I mean? You got to at least think that way, that, it's good to be able to do everything. Don't be a one-hit wonder because we roll up on the lake that you think you're going to be able to look at them and you can't. It rained 6 inches and it turned into mud and everything.
Henry. Yeah.
And Jason Christie got an orange bladed spinnerbait up there beating your brains out just going down the bank, standing on the trolling motor. You know what I mean? Like, you got to be able to, if you're going to be an elite angler, you got to do it all.
Greg, before we let you go, I figure I'd give you an opportunity. You had mentioned it previously, and it was something that I had seen since the last time we talked, and I was curious about it. But tell us about your new hook and how that came about. Because like Kyle said earlier, if Greg Hackney puts his name on anything and it says Hack Attack, people are going to care about it, and people are going to want to have it.
So, I officially signed with Gamakatsu, but I've been using Gamakatsu my whole life. I told them a funny story. I said, it's the first sharp hook I ever used. Because the Gamakatsu was the first chemically sharpened hook that I even knew about. It was a guy I grew up around, Jim Romans, fished the Classic through the Federation. Guy I thought a lot of, showed me the first. He's like, there were 5 in a package. These things were like I was filing a true turn hook at that time. And I went from fishing a file that I had filed with a file to a Gamakatsu. But the funny thing about the Hack Attack hook, it's been made by Gamakatsu the whole time. So it was made specially for that lineup. They didn't make a bass hook like that. They made a saltwater hook like that.
It's a gaff,
and
yeah.
Strike King went to them because I was flipping with their saltwater hook. The exact same hook was made a little different, but that was made in saltwater, because I had to find a hook that wouldn't bend, that wouldn't flex. Because I like that tournament. That I really started looking after that tournament that that happened, the situation I should have won. I just didn't have the right equipment. So after that, I started looking for a hook, and that's how I found that hook. And it was the length, and it had the right bite. Well, then Strike King, got Gamakatsu to start private. It was a private label deal, and we put it in the whole Hack Attack line: the spinner bait, the swim jig, a flipping hook in 3, 4, 5, and 6. But it's always been a Gamakatsu. There's no change there. They've been making the hook the whole time.
They've been unofficially dating. Now it's official.
Yeah. Well, if you look on the package of a lot of Hack Attack stuff, it said Gamakatsu, on the deal. But I'm officially and proud to be there too. And they just have so much great stuff. They have a flipping hook for everything, casting hook. That. But I like stuff that's easy, and you just tie them on. You don't have to do anything to them. That's what I like.
And then for your 3 spinning rods, they got Aaron's hook that you can use,
that's the deal. Like when I use Aaron's flipping hook when I'm flipping fluorocarbon, because typically I only use my hook most of the time. I'll use it with 25 fluoro, but most of the time braid. And typically when I go to fluoro, if it's 25 or 20 or whatever, I use Aaron's flipping hook for that. I love that coating. I just think it penetrates real easy. I like a hook that I change my hooks for equipment. You know what I mean? Like if I'm drop shotting with a spinning rod, I use that light wire heavy cover worm hook. I like that big bite, which is the same as the flipping hook, but I like it on a spinning rod. But it's a light wire, but it has that big bite because when you're fishing for big mouth fish,
Head on.
Now I'll use a smaller bite hook if it's spotted bass and that type of stuff. But like they just have a hook that everything, because like I'll use an EWG style hook on the same bait in Florida that I would put Aaron's flipping hook in. So if I'm casting a weightless shimmy stick or ocho, I like the EWG for casting because I'm pulling the hook. But if I'm flipping on a weight, if I got that shimmy stick rigged up on a weight, then I got it on a straight shank flipping hook, because I want that big bite and everything happens suddenly and we're up close. But casting a big worm, I like that EWG. I use a super line hook. I always have 16 or 20 pound, fluoro for casting. But yeah, that's a cool deal. I almost got tickled about it when I was talking to him, because I was like, I'll be honest with you, you don't sign a lot of sponsors. I have been able to align myself. I've been very fortunate that all the sponsors I have, I picked, if that makes sense. Now, and I'm not going to tell you that I had sponsors early on in my career that I didn't pick. Now, they were great, and they helped me out, and that was great. But I've reached the point where I run a Phoenix boat because I want to run a Phoenix boat. I run a Mercury because I want to run a Mercury. I'm running Lowrance because I want to, and it's cool that you get to use what you want to, and these people are also your sponsors. I've been very blessed with it. I have great sponsors. So it was funny, and to sign with Gamakatsu, because I'm like, well, I've been using them anyway. You know what I mean? So it's not like out and, it's cool. Everybody I got that's a sponsor is like, I wear Magellan clothing because I do all the shopping. My kids, all their hunting clothes have come from Academy their entire life because the price was good and they were growing. I just, you know what I mean? So to go to Academy now and see a rod rack with my picture on it, that's pretty cool. You know what I mean? Because these are places that I shop anyway.
And grab that buzzbait while you're there as well.
Yeah. If I do, and if I do buy anything fishing wise, non-sponsor related, I buy it at Academy. Their prices are the best. You know what I mean? It's a great relationship. I make money working for them. I spend money at their business. You know what I mean? So I have been like I said, I've been very blessed that I have surrounded myself with companies that I'm using the product regardless. And it makes it a lot easier to represent those people if you're using it. You know what I mean? And you want to use it. So,
well, Greg, Kyle, do you have anything left for Greg or?
I do not. That was fantastic.
Okay. It was.
Well,
Greg, we'll have to cut out the part, Greg, where you said you were blessed, because I know Julie doesn't want you to ever make somebody feel that they're not blessed because they don't have sponsors like you.
I have to be careful about saying that. I know I told you that she said that. She goes, "Oh, that's not so." She goes, "You think the guys who didn't catch them in that tournament, they were not blessed?" No, but
God
right.
chose me, man. He wanted me to catch. That's awesome. Well, Greg, I appreciate you joining us for way too long of a time, taking up out of your off season, but hope you have safe travels to Florida, your new boat, all your equipment's ready to go. I know you'll be primed up with about a week of the Sunshine State under your belt before you get going for Okeechobee. And we're excited. 2023 is here. We've had a longer off season, even though it's been busy at times. And I know that there's always that hurry up and get ready for the season right before it happens. So appreciate you taking the time.
Yeah, man. We'll see y'all later.
Awesome. Greg Hackney, episode 111, the Inside Bassmaster Podcast.